Dawn had yet to break when Emily Thompson passed through the service entrance of Manhattan's Waldorf Astoria. The biting December air stung her face as she pulled her worn coat tighter around herself, her footsteps echoing through the hotel's still empty marble corridors. At 28, Emily's brown eyes carried the determination of someone who knew life's weight well but refused to bend beneath it. The opulent lobby, with its crystal chandeliers resembling cascades frozen in time, stood in stark contrast to the simplicity of her navy blue uniform. As she pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevators, Emily caught glimpses of herself in the gold-trimmed mirrors lining the walls, a young woman with dreams too big for her housekeeper's salary, yet too precious to abandon. The New York winter ravaged the city outside, but inside the hotel, the temperature was regulated with the same precision that governed its employees' lives. Emily knew every rule, every protocol, every rehearsed smile she was expected to offer guests who barely registered her presence. 5 years on the job had taught her the art of invisibility, a skill she'd perfected to survive in this world of luxury where she didn't belong. That particular morning, as she arranged cleaning supplies on the 42nd floor, her thoughts drifted to the hospital bill that had arrived the day before. Her mother's chemotherapy sessions had begun accumulating debts that her paycheck could barely keep pace with. Each of her movements was a dance between hope and desperation, a silent ballet that no one else could see. The sound of raised voices interrupted her thoughts. Muffled shouts escaped from beneath the presidential suite's door. "You're destroying your father's legacy, Michael. These changes will ruin everything we've built." The door flew open and Michael Harrison, the hotel group's new CEO, nearly collided with her cart. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Emily caught the subtle scent of his imported cologne mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the cup he held. His blue eyes, typically cold and calculating in business magazine photos, now revealed a vulnerability that caught her off guard. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his words carrying more weight than a simple apology for almost appending cleaning supplies. "Are you all right?" His voice was different from what Emily had imagined, softer, more human. Before she could respond, an older man whom she recognized as Robert Harrison, Michael's uncle and board chairman, burst through the door. "This conversation isn't over, Michael. You can't just waltz in here and change policies that have existed for decades." Emily tried to make herself invisible, a skill she'd honed over the years, but something kept her anchored to this moment. Perhaps it was the way Michael maintained his composure, or how his eyes occasionally met hers, as if seeking an anchor amid the storm. "Times have changed, Uncle Robert," Michael replied, his voice firm but measured. "We can't keep treating our employees like numbers on a spreadsheet. They're people with lives, dreams." His gaze met Emily's again, and for a moment she felt as if he could see through all her protective layers, straight to her deepest fears and hopes. The argument continued to echo through the hotel's empty corridors for several minutes. When Robert finally left, leaving a heavy silence in his wake, Michael turned to Emily with a weary smile that never appeared in magazine photos. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said, running his hand through his dark hair in frustration. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." "Change is never easy," Emily surprised herself by responding, her voice steadier than expected. "But sometimes it's necessary." Michael studied her for a moment as if seeing her for the first time. "What's your name?" "Emily Thompson, sir." "Emily?" He repeated her name as if savoring each syllable. "How long have you worked here?" "5 years, sir." "Then you must know this place better than I do." He smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "What would you change if you could?" The question caught her off guard. In 5 years, no one from management had ever cared about her opinion. Emily hesitated, weighing each word. Maybe I'd start by treating people like people," she finally said, echoing his words from moments before. Michael's smile widened, reaching his eyes this time. "Exactly what I've been trying to implement," he said, pulling a card from his immaculate suit pocket. "I'd like to hear more of your ideas, Emily. How about coffee?" The card in her hand felt like it weighed a ton. Emily knew this moment could change her life, for better or worse, she couldn't tell yet. "Mr. Harrison, Michael," he corrected gently. "Please call me Michael." The sound of the arriving elevator broke the moment. Emily watched as he walked away, his cologne lingering in the air like an unspoken promise. She looked again at the card in her hands, the golden letters gleaming under the chandelier light. Michael Harrison's Harrison Hotel Group. That night, after her shift, Emily sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, still holding Michael's card. Through the window, Manhattan's lights sparkled across the river, as close yet as distant as the world Michael belonged to. This could be just another modern Cinderella story, she thought, except real life rarely followed fairy tales. Yet something about the way Michael had looked at her, as if he truly saw her, made her heart race with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. What she didn't know was that their chance encounter on the 42nd floor was about to trigger a series of events that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Fate had cast its dice, and now all that remained was to see where they would land. Bryant Park was awash in autumn gold when Emily finally found the courage to dial the number on the card. 3 days had passed since her encounter with Michael in the Waldorf Astoria's corridor, and each minute seemed weighted with 1,000 unrealized possibilities. Sitting on a park bench during her lunch break, she watched leaves dance in the wind while holding her phone with trembling fingers. Michael's card, already worn at the edges from constant handling, seemed to burn in her pocket. Across the street, the New York Public Library stood majestic, its marble columns reminding her of how different her life was from his. Harrison Group, Mr. Harrison's office, an efficient voice answered. Emily's heart leaped. "Hi, this is Emily Thompson from the Waldorf." "Oh, Emily." The voice on the other end softened immediately. "Mr. Harrison left specific instructions about your call. I can transfer you right now." Before she could process the information that Michael had been expecting her call, his deep voice filled the line. "Emily, it's good to hear from you. I was beginning to think you'd thrown my card away." There was a note of relief in his voice that caught her off guard. "Sorry for the delay, I was busy," she lied, unable to admit she'd spent 3 days gathering courage. "How about that coffee? I'm free this afternoon." Emily froze. Today meant less time to prepare, less time to panic, less time to back out. Today, her voice came out higher than usual. "Unless you'd prefer another day," Michael quickly responded. "I don't want to disrupt your routine." "No, today is perfect," she heard herself saying, while her mind screamed in protest. "After my shift? Perfect. I know a discreet place near the hotel. Meet you in the lobby at 5? After hanging up, Emily remained seated, watching tourists take photos on the library steps. Her entire life had been built on carefully planned routines: wake up at 5, catch the subway at 6, start work at 7. Now, with a single phone call, all those certainties seemed as fragile as the autumn leaves twirling around her. Rose, her best friend and fellow housekeeper, noticed something different the moment Emily returned to work. "You're different," she said, narrowing her eyes as they organized towels. "What happened during your break?" Emily hesitated. Rose had been her confidant for 5 years, but telling her about Michael would make everything too real. "Nothing much," she answered, focusing on the towels. "Just made an important decision." "Emily Thompson, I know you. This has something to do with that card you keep looking at when you think no one's watching?" Before Emily could respond, Sandra Martinez, the housekeeping supervisor, appeared in the hallway. Her usually stern face looked even more tense. "Emily, could you come with me for a moment?" Emily's heart raced. Had someone discovered about the coffee with Michael? She followed Sandra to a small service room, where the supervisor carefully closed the door. "HR informed me that you were seen talking with Mr. Harrison in the 42nd floor corridor," Sandra began, her voice low but firm. "You need to understand your position here, Emily. People like us don't mix with people like them." Emily felt her face burn. "It was nothing, Sandra. He just asked my opinion about some changes in the hotel." "Exactly. And since when do CEOs ask housekeepers for their opinion?" Sandra sighed, her tone softening. "Look, you're a good employee. I don't want to see you getting hurt or worse, losing your job over a misunderstanding." Sandra's words followed her throughout the day, mingling with her own doubts. As 5 o'clock approached, Emily changed from her uniform into a simple dress she'd brought from home, the best she owned, but still clearly out of place in Michael Harrison's world. In the lobby, her reflection in the golden mirrors seemed misplaced, like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. At exactly 5, Michael appeared, his Italian suit dramatically contrasting with her department store dress. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely, and for a moment, Emily almost believed it. The cafe was just 2 blocks away, a discreet yet elegant establishment with dark wooden tables and soft lighting. Michael chose a table in the back, away from windows and curious eyes. "I've thought a lot about our conversation," he began after they ordered. "About treating people like people. You made me realize that the changes I want to implement are more important than I imagined." Emily watched how his eyes lit up as he spoke about his plans: improved working conditions, scholarship programs for employees, childcare for staff members' children. It was hard not to be infected by his enthusiasm. "Why are you telling me all this?" she finally asked. Michael studied her for a moment before answering. Because you're the first person I've met who sees this work as I do, not just as a business, but as a responsibility to the people who are part of it. The coffee grew cold between them as they talked, hours slipping by like seconds. Emily found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, about her sick mother, her dream of studying business administration, the nights she cried alone wondering how to pay the hospital bills. When they finally left the cafe, night had fallen over Manhattan, transforming the streets into rivers of neon light. Michael insisted on calling a taxi to take her home, and Emily was too tired to protest. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his hand lightly touching her arm as he opened the taxi door. Emily knew she should say no. Sandra was right, people like her didn't mix with people like him. But there was something in the way Michael looked at her that made all the barriers seem a little less insurmountable. "Yes," she answered softly, and his smile lit up the night. In the taxi, Emily watched the city pass by her window, her heart divided between hope and fear. In her dress pocket, Michael's new card burned with unspoken promises, and in her mind, Sandra's words echoed like a distant warning. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, Robert Harrison sat in his office atop the Waldorf, eyes fixed on a photo of Emily and Michael leaving the cafe, sent by one of his informants. His face hardened as he typed a short message on his phone. "We need to handle this now." Emily's life was about to become far more complicated than she could imagine, and that coffee would be just the first step in a journey that would test not only her heart but her strength and determination as well. Monday morning arrived with news that spread through the Waldorf Astoria like wildfire. Emily had barely started her shift when Rose pulled her into a corner of the cleaning supply room, her eyes wide with concern. "You won't believe this," Rose whispered, holding up her phone. "Someone took pictures of you with Mr. Harrison at the cafe. It's all over the gossip sites. Billionaire CEO seen with employee in secret rendezvous." The world seemed to spin beneath Emily's feet. On Rose's phone screen, there she was, sitting with Michael at the cafe, their expressions captured in a moment of complicity that now seemed terribly exposed. "This isn't possible," Emily whispered, her hands shaking as she took the phone. "It was just coffee?" But the headlines screamed a different story. Secret romance at the Waldorf? Modern Cinderella? Housekeeper wins CEO's heart? Scandal in Manhattan high society. The photos spread like a virus, each site adding its own sensationalist interpretation. The day that followed was a nightmare. Wherever Emily went, stares and whispers followed. Some employees avoided her completely, others asked intrusive questions. Even guests seemed to recognize her, their glances alternating between curiosity and disdain. During her break, Emily took refuge on the 35th floor's emergency stairwell, her secret spot when she needed a moment of peace. It was there that her phone vibrated with a message from Michael. "I'm so sorry about all this. Can we talk? I need to see you." Before she could respond, the stairwell door opened. Robert Harrison stood there, his immaculate suit a stark contrast to the industrial setting. His face was a mask of studied courtesy, but his eyes were cold as steel. "Miss Thompson," he said, closing the door behind him. "How convenient to find you here." Emily stood quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Harrison, Let me be direct," he cut her off, his voice low but sharp. "You're an intelligent young woman. You must understand that this interest my nephew has shown in you cannot continue." He pulled an envelope from his suit's inner pocket. "Inside this envelope is a check with a generous sum. Enough to pay for your mother's treatment and ensure you can study at any university you choose." Emily felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "How do you know about my mother?" "I know everything I need to know," Robert replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I also know you're a sensible person. Michael is about to take full control of the group. We can't afford a scandal right now." The envelope hung between them like an accusation. Emily looked at it, then at Robert, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Harrison," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everyone has a price, Miss Thompson. Some are just higher than others." He placed the envelope on the stair railing. "Think carefully. Do you really want to be responsible for destroying Michael's career? Because that's what will happen if this story continues." With those words, he left, leaving Emily alone with the envelope and the weight of an impossible decision. Her hands trembled when she finally picked up the envelope. Inside, the check had more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. That night, her tiny Brooklyn apartment felt even more cramped than usual. Emily sat at the kitchen table, where her mother's medical bills were stacked next to Robert's check. On the TV, A reporter discussed the scandal of the moment in New York's business world. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages from Michael, each more concerned than the last. The latest one simply read, "Please let me explain. It's not what you're thinking." But what was she thinking? That she could have a fairy tale in the 21st century? That social differences didn't matter when the heart was involved? The sound of a key in the door pulled her from her thoughts. Rose entered, carrying bags of Chinese food and wearing a determined expression. "Don't even think about facing this alone," she declared, setting the bags on the table. "I brought reinforcements." As Rose arranged the food containers, Emily finally let the tears fall. She told her about Robert's visit, about the check, about her fear of destroying Michael's career. "You know what's worse?" she said between sobs. "I really like him, Rose. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man who spent hours talking about how he wanted to make a difference in people's lives." Rose hugged her tight. "And that's why you can't give up. If he's half the man you say he is, he'll fight for you." As if confirming Rose's words, Emily's phone vibrated with a new message from Michael. "I'm coming over. We need to talk in person. Please give me that chance." Emily looked at Rose, panic evident in her eyes. "What do I do?" "You get ready," Rose replied, already heading to Emily's closet. "And face this with your head held high. Because if there's one thing I've learned working at the Waldorf, it's that class has nothing to do with money." As Rose helped her get ready, Emily looked again at the check on the table. With a decisive motion, she picked it up and tore it to pieces, feeling as if an enormous weight had lifted from her shoulders. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, Michael was fighting his own battle in the hotel's boardroom, facing not just his uncle, but years of prejudice and entrenched traditions. The storm was just beginning, and the next few hours would determine not only their future but the fate of everyone involved in this story. The knock on the door came at exactly 9 o'clock. Emily, her heart still racing, watched Rose take one last look through the window of the small Brooklyn apartment. "It's him," Rose confirmed, squeezing her friend's shoulder in support. "And he's not alone. There are at least 3 photographers down there." Emily took a deep breath, nervously smoothing her simple dress. With hesitant steps, she approached the door. When she opened it, Michael stood there, his expensive suit wrinkled and his tie loose, revealing signs of a difficult day. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Rose grabbed her purse. "I'll let you two talk," she said, giving Emily a meaningful look before leaving. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Michael stood in the middle of the small living room, looking strangely out of place among the simple furniture and peeling walls. His eyes scanned the room until they fixed on the torn pieces of the check on the table. "So he really did it," Michael murmured, his expression hardening. "My uncle tried to buy your silence." "How did you find out?" Emily asked, still standing near the door. "Robert bragged about it during the board meeting. Part of his plan to protect the company's interests." Michael ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "Emily, I'm sorry. I should have known he'd do something like this." "Why are you here, Michael?" she asked directly. "The photographers downstairs will only make everything worse." "I'm here because I care about you," he answered, taking a step toward her. "And because I'm tired of living by rules that don't make sense." At that moment, Emily's phone rang. It was the hospital. Her heart froze as she answered. "Miss Thompson? Your mother's had a relapse. We need you to come immediately." The world seemed to spin. Emily felt her knees buckle, and Michael caught her before she fell. "What happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "My mother," she managed to say between tears. "I need to get to the hospital now." Without hesitation, Michael grabbed his keys. "I'll take you." "But the photographers." "To hell with the photographers," he declared. "Some things are more important than appearances." The drive to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center was a blur of lights and sirens. Michael drove his Audi R8 through Manhattan streets as if his own life depended on it, occasionally holding Emily's hand when she trembled too much. At the hospital, reality hit them like a slap. Sarah Thompson was in the ICU, fighting a severe infection caused by chemotherapy. The doctor explained the situation in technical terms that Emily could barely process. "We need to start a new treatment immediately," the doctor concluded. "But given the payment history?" "Money isn't an issue," Michael interrupted, pulling out his card. "Do whatever's necessary." Emily tried to protest, but he gently silenced her. "Let me help, please. Not as a CEO, not as a Harrison, but as someone who cares about you." The following hours were an emotional roller coaster. While doctors fought to stabilize Sarah, Emily and Michael remained in the waiting room. He never left her side even when his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from the board. It was during this vigil that Emily truly got to know Michael. He spoke about his own mother who had died of cancer when he was just 12. About how his father dove into work afterward, turning the hotel into his obsession. About how he promised himself he'd do things differently when he took control. That's why the changes are so important to you, Emily realized. Yes, he confirmed. The hotel can't just be a business. It needs to be a family. When the sun began to rise, painting Manhattan's sky in shades of pink and gold, the doctor finally brought good news. Sarah was stable, responding well to the new treatment. Emily cried with relief in Michael's arms, not caring who might see. It was at this moment that Robert Harrison appeared in the hospital corridor, his face a mask of contained fury. "This is unacceptable," he thundered, brandishing a newspaper. On the front page, a photo of Michael and Emily entering the hospital dominated the headline. Forbidden romance takes CO to public hospital. Michael stood up, positioning himself between Emily and his uncle. "Enough, Robert. It's over." "Over? Do you have any idea of the damage you're causing to the company? To our name?" "No, you're the one who doesn't understand," Michael responded, his voice carrying an authority Emily had never heard before. "While you worry about appearances, real people are suffering. Employees like Emily who can barely afford treatment for their sick family members. This ends today." Robert laughed humorlessly. "And what do you plan to do? Turn our five-star hotel into a charity?" "No," Michael answered calmly. "I plan to turn it into an example of how a company can be successful without losing its humanity." The confrontation was interrupted by a nurse arriving to inform them that Sarah had awakened and was asking for her daughter. Emily hesitated, looking at Michael. "Go," he said softly. "I'll handle this." As Emily walked away down the corridor, she could still hear Michael and Robert's raised voices. A battle was being fought and she was at its center. But for the first time since this whole story began, she wasn't afraid. Because now she knew that some things, love, dignity, humanity, were worth any fight. The week following the hospital incident was a whirlwind of sensational headlines and tense meetings at the Waldorf Astoria. Emily tried to maintain her normal routine, but nothing was normal anymore. The hotel corridors, once her refuge, now felt like a minefield of stares and whispers. Sarah began recovering slowly in the hospital, now settled in a private room overlooking Central Park, courtesy of Michael, despite Emily's protests. During her daily visits, mother and daughter finally had time for long overdue conversations. "He reminds me of your father," Sarah remarked one afternoon, watching Emily arrange the flowers Michael sent daily. "The same determination in his eyes, the same way of fighting for what he believes in." Emily paused, surprised. Her mother rarely spoke about her father. "What do you mean?" Sarah adjusted herself in the hospital bed, her face more colored than in recent days. "Your father also faced a lot of opposition when we fell in love. He was a university professor, I was a janitor on campus. People didn't understand." "What happened?" Emily asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He died in a car accident, on his way to a meeting where he was going to defend our relationship to the university board." Sarah took her daughter's hand. "That's why I was so worried when I saw the news about you and Michael. I didn't want you to suffer like I did." "Mom?" Emily began but was interrupted by a knock on the door. Rose rushed in, her face tense. "Emily, you need to see this." On her tablet, a live broadcast showed Michael standing in the Waldorf lobby, surrounded by reporters. His dark suit and upright posture contrasted with the tired expression on his face. "I'm here today," his voice echoed clearly through the speakers, "to announce significant changes at the Harrison Group. Starting today, we're implementing a comprehensive benefits program for all employees, including complete medical care and scholarships." Cameras flashed as he continued. "Furthermore, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Sarah Thompson Healthcare Foundation, which will provide free medical assistance to hotel industry workers and their families." Emily felt tears streaming down her face as her mother squeezed her hand. On screen, Michael looked directly into the camera, as if speaking straight to her. "As for the rumors about my personal life," he continued, his voice steady, "yes, I am in a relationship with Emily Thompson. And no, I'm not ashamed of it. On the contrary, I'm proud to stand beside someone who has taught me more about integrity and strength of character than any MBA ever could." Reporters erupted with questions, but Michael raised his hand, requesting silence. "One last thing. For those questioning whether a housekeeper can be worthy of a CEO?" He paused meaningfully, "Perhaps the real question is whether I'm worthy of her." The silence in the hospital room was broken only by the soft sound of the TV and Emily's contained sobs. Rose hugged her friend, while Sarah smiled through her own tears. "Emily," Sarah called softly, "I think it's time for you to go to him. But what about you?" "I'll be fine," Sarah assured her. "Rose can stay with me. You have a battle to fight by his side." Rose was already grabbing her car keys. "Come on, I'll drive you." The trip to the Waldorf was a blur of emotions and city lights. When they arrived, the crowd of reporters still surrounded the main entrance, but Rose knew a side entrance used by employees. In the lobby, Emily could hear Robert Harrison's voice coming from the conference room. "This is outrageous. You're destroying decades of tradition." "No, Uncle," Michael's voice responded calmly. "I'm building a better future." Emily took a deep breath and opened the door. All heads turned in her direction. Michael stood at the head of the conference table, surrounded by board members. His face lit up at the sight of her. "Emily," he said, extending his hand toward her. Robert stood up abruptly. "This is a private board meeting." "Not anymore," a new voice said from the door. Emily turned to see an elegant lady entering the room, leaning on a dark wooden cane. "As the majority shareholder of the Harrison Group, I say she stays." "Margaret?" Robert paled at the sight of his older sister, the Harrison family matriarch, who rarely appeared in public since her husband's death. Margaret Harrison walked to Emily, her blue eyes so similar to Michael's, studying her intently. "So you're the young woman causing all this commotion?" "Yes, ma'am," Emily responded, keeping her head high. A soft smile appeared on Margaret's lips. "Excellent. It was about time someone shook things up around here." Autumn in New York was painting Central Park in golden hues when the Waldorf Astoria announced its most significant changes in decades. The hotel's historic lobby buzzed with journalists and photographers, all eager to cover what was being called the Harrison Revolution. Emily, wearing a navy blue suit, a gift from Margaret Harrison, watched from the front row as Michael prepared to make the official announcement. Beside her, her mother Sarah, now recovered and radiant, held her hand tightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice echoing through the marble lobby. For almost a century, the Waldorf Astoria has been synonymous with luxury and tradition. Today we want it to also be synonymous with humanity and social innovation. Cameras flashed as he detailed the changes. A revolutionary employee benefits program, on-site childcare, university scholarships for employees and their children, and the implementation of the Sarah Thompson Foundation. "But our greatest change," Michael continued, his eyes finding Emily's, "is in how we view our own Waldorf family. Starting today, I announce the creation of the Employee Council, which will have direct participation in company decisions. And I'm proud to announce its first president." Emily felt her heart stop when Michael gestured toward her. "Emily Thompson isn't just the woman I love. She's the voice our employees have long needed." The room erupted in applause, led by Margaret Harrison, who smiled with evident satisfaction. Robert, seated in a distant corner, maintained a neutral expression, but his eyes revealed a reluctant understanding of change's inevitability. Rose, now Human Resources Manager, was the first to hug Emily. "You did it, friend. You really did it." But the day's surprises weren't over. After the official announcement, Margaret requested a private moment with Emily in her penthouse office. The panoramic view of Manhattan served as a backdrop while the Harrison matriarch poured herself tea. "You know, Emily," Margaret began, her gaze lost in the city below, "when I married Henry Harrison, I was his secretary. His family reacted exactly as Robert reacted to you." Emily observed the elegant lady with new eyes. "I didn't know." "Few people know," Margaret smiled. "History has an interesting way of repeating itself, doesn't it? The difference is that Henry yielded to family pressure. Our marriage survived, but something in him broke that day." She turned to Emily, her penetrating blue eyes intense. "Michael is different. He has the courage his father never had. And you, my dear, have something that took me years to develop. The strength to fight not just for love but for change." Margaret opened a drawer and took out an old envelope. "These are the shares Henry left me. 30% of the Harrison Group. As of today they're yours." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "Mrs. Harrison, I can't." "Margaret, please," the lady gently interrupted. "And yes, you can. More than that, you must. These shares aren't a gift, they're a responsibility. Use them to ensure that the changes you and Michael have started cannot be undone." Silent tears rolled down Emily's face as Margaret continued. "When you first walked that hotel corridor, you were just a housekeeper. Today you're the hope for change for thousands of workers. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve to be where you are. The moment was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Michael entered, stopping in surprise at the sight of Emily's tears. "Is everything all right?" he asked worriedly. "Better than all right," Margaret answered, rising with a knowing smile. "Just ensuring the Waldorf's future is in good hands." After Margaret left, Michael embraced Emily from behind, both watching the sunset over Manhattan through the enormous windows. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Emily held the envelope with the shares, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity. "About how life can change completely in such a short time. A few months ago, I could barely pay my mother's hospital bills. Now you have the power to help others in the same situation," Michael completed. "And that's why I love you. Because your heart always thinks of others first." Emily turned in his arms, studying the face of the man who had turned her world upside down. "What happens now?" "Now," he smiled, "we start the real revolution. Together." Outside the office, the sun set over a transformed New York, at least for the Waldorf Astoria employees. A new era was beginning, built on the foundations of love, courage, and determination of a former housekeeper who dared to dream beyond her circumstances. And this was just the first page of a much bigger story to come. 1 year passed since the great changes at the Waldorf Astoria. Snow fell softly over Manhattan that December morning, covering the city with a white mantle that seemed to purify everything it touched. In the hotel lobby, a giant Christmas tree sparkled with thousands of lights, but that wasn't the main attraction of the day. In the grand ballroom, employees from all levels gathered for the first annual Sarah Thompson Foundation Awards ceremony. The space, normally reserved for luxury weddings and corporate events, had been transformed into a symbol of the hotel's new era. Emily, wearing an emerald green dress, watched from the side of the stage as the first guests arrived. Rose, now her chief advisor on the employee council, approached with a tablet in hand. "The numbers are in," Rose whispered, barely containing her excitement. "The scholarship program has already benefited over 200 employees and their children. The daycare is operating at maximum capacity, and the new health plan has saved dozens of families from bankruptcy." Emily smiled, remembering her own struggle with hospital bills. "And the pilot project in other hotels?" 5 hotel chains have already adopted our humanized management model," Rose responded proudly. "It seems your revolution is spreading." The crowd's murmur grew as Michael entered the hall, accompanied by his Aunt Margaret. Robert Harrison was also present, sitting discreetly in the back. The last few months had softened his opposition, especially after the hotel's profits increased under the new management. Sarah Thompson, elegant in a navy blue suit, took the stage to open the ceremony. Her voice, strong and clear, echoed through the hall. "A year ago, I was in a hospital bed, without hope and without a future. Today, I'm here to celebrate not just my recovery, but the transformation of hundreds of lives. This foundation doesn't bear my name by chance. It represents the hope that no family should have to choose between health and survival." Tears flowed freely down Emily's face as her mother continued. "My daughter and Michael didn't just fall in love, they showed us that love can be a force for social change. That when we open our hearts, we open infinite possibilities." The ceremony proceeded with the distribution of scholarships, recognitions, and announcements of new programs. Among the recipients was Sandra Martinez, the former supervisor who had warned Emily about her place. Today, she directed the hotel's professional training program. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she felt the weight of all the past year's transformations. The microphone caught her deep breath before she began. "Just over a year ago, I was a housekeeper trying to balance medical bills with impossible dreams. Today, I stand before you not as an individual success story, but as proof that real change is possible when we unite." Her eyes found Michael's in the audience. "I learned that true love isn't just about 2 people, it's about how that love can transform the world around us. Every child in our daycare, every employee attending college, every family that no longer needs to choose between medicine and rent. These are the real love stories we celebrate today." Margaret Harrison, watching everything with tearful eyes, rose with the help of her cane, and that's why the board voted unanimously to expand the program across the entire Harrison network. Starting next year, all our hotels worldwide will implement the same policies. The applause was deafening. Emily saw Rose hugging Sarah, while Michael climbed the stage to join her. Even Robert Harrison was applauding, a small reluctant smile on his lips. Michael took the microphone, his hand intertwined with Emily's. "When I fell in love with Emily, many said it was a mistake, that she didn't belong in our world. Today, I realize we were the ones who didn't belong in her world, a world of compassion, courage, and true nobility of spirit. He knelt, drawing gasps from the audience. Emily Thompson, you've already transformed my life and the lives of hundreds of people. Now, would you do me the honor of continuing this journey as my wife? The ring he held was simple and elegant, exactly like Emily. Through tears, she managed to answer, "Yes, but with one condition." "What's that?" Michael asked, smiling. "That our wedding be here, with all the hotel employees as guests of honor." The response came in the form of applause and shouts of joy. Margaret raised her glass in a silent toast, while Sarah embraced Rose, both crying with happiness. Outside, snow continued falling over New York, covering the city with promises of a new beginning. In the Waldorf Astoria lobby, beneath the grand Christmas tree, a former housekeeper and a CEO celebrated not just their love, but proof that sometimes modern fairy tales aren't about princes saving damsels, they're about ordinary people having the courage to change the world. And so, amid applause and tears of joy, Emily and Michael sealed not just their commitment to each other, but to a future where love and social justice walked hand in hand. Because after all, the best love stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with the promise of a better tomorrow for everyone. So, what did you think of this story of love and social transformation? What moved you the most? Emily's struggle to help her mother, Michael's courage in standing up to his family, or how their love ended up changing so many lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you and you want more powerful narratives like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Life Stories channel. Your support is crucial for us to continue bringing stories that not only move hearts but also inspire real changes in our society. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming touching stories. Next week, we'll bring another incredible narrative that will touch your heart and make you believe in the power of love and perseverance. Until our next story.